go. So, welcome to Good Food on Earth. I'm joined today by Amandha Vollmer. If you don't know her, she is a professional holistic practitioner in Ontario, and she's done incredible work with her research and her practice. She's a mother. She has a degree of Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine from the Canadian College of Medicine in Toronto, and a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Biotechnology. She's also a registered Reiki practitioner and teacher, and she's studied homeopathy, botanical medicine, and more. And right now, she owns and operates YumNaturals Emporium in Ontario, and she's the author of Healing with DMSO. So, welcome, Amanda. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me. It's a joy.
Now, with everything that's going on globally right now, and with the increasing lockdowns that have been hitting a lot of Canadian provinces, um, I started doing a lot of research way back in March into the history of infectious diseases and vaccinations to see, what is, if somebody asked me about that, well, what about polio? What about smallpox? What about all of these? And that's how I discovered you. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit of what got you interested into looking into that area and what you discovered. And feel free to just go with it because I know you know so much.
Well, yeah, it's a huge topic, obviously, and when you're a lateral thinker and you grow up in a world where you realize that not everything appears as it is, so that this world is one of illusions, then if you're a seeker like I've been, you continually ask questions. So you don't just take whatever story is handed to you, you consider it first, and then you just make a decision. Well, is that true or not true? And how can I verify or validate that? And there's many ways to do that. And one is obviously through your intuition and your connection to source, which I was blessed to have that at a young age and to understand that this world is more than just the solid foundation of what we think things are, that everything is energy. And I understood that. So when I went through naturopathic college, and even way before that, when I was dabbling in herbs and homeopathy, and having my experiences, helping animals heal, I realized something wasn't adding up as far as the history we've been sold, they're told, the history that we think is real, like polio or any of these stories, right? And I really, the books I was reading were very philosophical, and they were very existential, and a lot of books on energy, for example, Vibrational Medicine by Dr. Richard Gerber as one example, right? And so in understanding, wanting to really get to the root cause, because I have this sense that we get to essence, we always get to simplicity. We start off in a muck of mess, and then we refine and refine it further until we get into the simplicity, which is a fundamental truth, um, and or some sort of doctrine or a law, right? And in delving into that, I found history that didn't line up as far as who Louis Pasteur was, for example. That when I found out there was a 40-year argument over germ theory versus terrain theory, I was like, 40 years, okay, obviously there are two sides to this story, and I need to, in all fairness, understand both sides. And if you do that in an open mind and you go in looking and seeking and not making your final decision for a good long while until time distills it, then you'll learn a lot. You will continue to learn, and you will understand that politics gets intermingled into all of these bodies of knowledge. Agendas get put into all of these agencies and governments and things. And if you look at epoch after epoch, and how how Rome fell, or how any of these societies had their golden years and then had their peak and then started to degrade, it's all the same pattern over and over again. And I find patterns fascinating. And so I always look for pattern. And if you can step back and see how the fractal moves, then you can get a sense of how this storyline kind of goes. And basically, I just started to read and read and read, and realized it was really Ethel Douglas Hume's book, and some of the Beauchamp's work and that sort of stuff that really got me zinging about the germ theory, not holding water, T.C. Fry, A Myth of Contagion, these sorts of things. I learned about Robert O. Young long ago. I learned about John Rappaport long ago. And so they all question these things. They're good thinkers, deep thinkers. They don't just go for the common party line, they go deep, right? And that's how I think, and that's what fuels me. That's part of my purpose to be here. So yeah, I mean, really, it just came down to that. And then understanding homeopathy and loving homeopathy, going to India and studying it there, and having all these different experiences that were very profound, and actually putting it into practice and clinical practice and seeing amazing results, and realizing there's something that can happen immediately with the body. It doesn't have to take a long time to heal, which I was very fascinated about. And when I started to realize that when German new medicine start to understand that the emotional state is really what's driving everything, and what's the emotions, and how does that translate into the body. And I read Candace Pert's work, and I got into Bruce Lipton's work, and all of these things, right? So it's interesting, because it was like this creation of all these parts and pieces that led me down into this. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I was driving and having a conversation with someone, a health conversation. I said, this virus thing hasn't sat with me well for a while. And I haven't done my due diligence on that particular topic. I understand isopathy. I understand toxins are the cause of disease, and lack of nutrition is the cause of disease. And I'd unraveled all of the different so-called vaccine diseases, that that's not the case, and that polio was really DDT poisoning. And most of the other diseases that we think are associated with the virus just fall apart. And obviously, Dr. Stefan Lenka proved that measles doesn't exist in a court of law, court of appeals, and won his case, right? So we have all the evidence that points that way, but it hadn't clicked for me. There's always a moment with truth work and with your own introspection where there's just that one piece of the puzzle that it just becomes a reality for you. And so in that conversation, I just said, yeah, I think I have to go a little bit deeper now. It's my turn to figure this out. And I did a video. Actually, I rarely get any kind of illness or anything because I detox regularly, but I was really stressed. That year was really stressful. And so I actually had a sore throat, and my voice I'd lost it almost, but I had to do this video. So I do this video on, viruses don't exist. And I said, no, when you understand the German medicine and the isopathy, you realize that your own cells are pleomorphic, and they change shape. They change from bacteria to fungal to whatever you want to call as viruses, to these little packets of DNA or RNA, and that they bleb off the red blood cell membrane, and that only special microscopes can see the living blood and see this transformation happening. And it has been mapped. It's a 16-stage cycle. Gaston Nasens has a beautiful map of it. I posted a video on exactly what it looks like under the somatoscope, which, when you look at what happens to people like that, you have to raise some interesting questions in your head, because this is somebody who was brilliant scientist, a brilliant man. And he ended up having his lab raided, his somatoscope stolen, dismantled. No one can find the parts anymore. All of his research taken, never given back. He was thrown in jail. His mental health was questioned. So this is what we do to our brilliant thinkers, our deep researchers. This is what happens to them. Like, what's happening, right? You have to go, well, why would that happen? You have to go down that rabbit hole. And so in understanding that, I said, but so you can't have a virus floating around and then randomly causing a disease in someone. It just doesn't work like that at all. And also you would have to have the same symptoms. So say you took that particle, you have to satisfy Henle-Koch's postulates. You have to be able to prove with science that is the disease causing agent. And no one has been able to do that. The only way they're able to fake this science is if they have adjuvants added. And that's what they do with vaccines as well, because no vaccine would ever produce a titer if they didn't put metals in it. It would never work. That's why they can't make a green vaccine or a safe vaccine. It's impossible because
Yeah.
they would never see the evidence that it had done anything physically to the body. They tried to do that in the Spanish flu time, the 1911 or 1918 Spanish flu, rather. They tried to do this contagion test to see how contagious was it. They couldn't make anybody sick,
Right.
you know. And we're sort of come full circle again with this great purge and this eugenicist basic cleaning up of the population that they like to do every 100 years or so, and under again a political agenda of a false scary thing that no one in the common society can actually prove.
Mm.
You can't they can't prove it. You can't see it. You don't have a microscope to go there. You have to trust an authority to tell you what's happening, and you have to believe that or not believe it. And that's there's no evidence, and that's what's really alarming about what's going on right now. But really it was just deep introspection and wanting to know, and also my intuition and my gut feeling that something's not quite right here about this story, and it proved to be the case, exactly the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. There's so much that you mentioned in there that I'd love to touch on a few of those points, because I'm sure a lot of people watching this video, a lot of what you say will be like, they'll be like, "What? Viruses don't exist? I can't believe that. Like polio is not a thing." Like, or it's very paradigm shifting for a lot of people, and it's very challenging. But I wonder if you could just expand a little bit on two things to start with: the germ theory. Because that is very, I think, central to this, and the work of Beauchamp, who you mentioned. What was it? He was around the same time as Pasteur, and most people have never heard of him. But what did you discover with those two things?
Well, I discovered that the history had been rewritten, and I know that the paradigm can be very shocking for people because it's an additive effect over the period of your life that you just believe what you've been told. And it is hard. It's not easy. It's not easy to wake up. It's not easy to realize you were wrong. It's not easy to swallow your pride and deal with your ego and actually not be complacent. It takes effort, takes time, takes some resources, and a lot of people are either very tapped out or they're lazy and they're slothful, right? And they've let that become their day to day. With the germ theory, and Beauchamp and that time frame, like Dr. Stefan Lanka talks about it very, very clearly. And he was the one that was the first, I think for many, he was very first opener of the history of that time and what was going on, and the war between France and Britain, and how they used a fake virus idea, how they came up with it to make sure that the ships coming into French port wouldn't be served because they were told there was some invisible sickness that they had rolling around, so they wouldn't be served. So it actually became a war tactic
Mm.
to tell people that there was something that was going to kill them, right? And it worked very, very well, and that's where the word virus came from, was Latin for toxin or poison. And they couldn't see that small anyway. They could never verify it. All they had was a filtrate of they would try to filter out what they thought the size of bacterium are, which there are many different sizes of bacterium. So they could have still had a bacteria in there and called it a virus or called it a infectious agent. But they were guessing. They were not sure of what they were talking about. And when I say viruses don't exist, what I'm saying is they don't exist as described. There are particles that we have in the body that they take and they say, look, there's nucleic acid inside of this so-called shape, and this is what the virus is and this is what it does. But that's very convenient to manipulate science to fool the masses, because it can look very fancy, and it can have very fancy language. It has a jargon that no one can read and listen to. And so it's easy to make it sound like it's impressive, like somehow it's real, right? and especially with the television and the sort of thing being convincing, because there's a flicker rate there that can get right through the way the mind works. If you understand the different wavelengths of the mind, you can really embed ideas into people, and they don't can't overcome a lot of it. They have to work hard to overcome hypnosis, right? So really Beauchamp was a researcher and a scientist and a doctor, and he was quite incredible. And Pasteur was plagiarized his work. He knew of him. He was a contemporary of his, and he would sort of steal what he was doing and go to the king who he had favor with and say, "Hey, I learned this cool thing, and let's do it." But he really just stole it from Beauchamp. Now this is a time you don't have internet, so you can't really trace back where you got the idea from. If you're conniving enough, you can just steal ideas from somebody else and just lie and say it's your own. You're not really there's going to be only a handful of people they're going to really know that you did that. So you have to consider that. And there is a book written by Gerald Geisen, that is very expensive, but I purchased it. I think they make a lot of these books expensive so that they're prohibitive for a lot of people to obtain and find the truth, with rampant censorship going on here today that we're seeing, modern day sort of book burning. But this book was quite interesting because actually Geisen was a bit of a pasture apologist in it, because he says, well, he still, came up with this sort of on his own, and that on his own, and so forth, like the pasteurization and everything. But pasteurization is terrible. um, you kill the bacteria in a product, and if you're to drink milk, it should be raw, and that's where you get your any health benefit from that substance. Otherwise, it's pro-inflammatory and causes phlegm, mucus, all these other problems in the body. So, he was just a devil in everything that he did. And so, for example, silk was a huge industry, as it is now, but back then, the way it was run, they were having problems with the silkworms, and they were dying. And Beauchamp was called in to solve the problem. And what he did is he realized that by his microscopic work and by his just brilliant mind, there must be another agent involved, like a mite. So he deduced that it was a mite infection in the colonies, and he used a fogging mist of creosote to in a chamber, and that killed the mites, but not the silkworm and eggs. And then Pasteur watches him do it, and he takes this egg. When he first comes into a silkworm factory, he doesn't even understand what it is. That's how stupid the man was. He shook. He was like, "What is this?" Right? Okay, this is where we're at here. And he instead of going, "Wow, you have the cure for it," he went to the king and he said, "Well, we don't know what's causing it, and I should go around to all the different silk factories and do my investigations and stuff." So he was responsible for this going on for years of deaths of silkworm. The industry almost failed. Meanwhile, Beauchamp had the cure from very early, like, early on in the infestation. So this is the type of scoundrel we're dealing with here. And so yeah, the history then took Pasteur and made him look like he was some sort of brilliant guy, came up with all these ideas. It's easy to write that in history books. It's not that difficult to hide the truth and to rewrite things. And then what do you learn in school? You learn all about him in school.
Mm-hmm.
I remember learning.
Yeah.
I remember, what he so-called did, and his face is everywhere, and there's institutes named after him and all this stuff. So it's just yet another false hero. Sorry, I forgot what your first question was, because I
Oh,
skipped to the
just
second one.
the germ theory and Beauchamp, those two issues.
Oh,
So I'm one of the things that people are convinced about is, if a lot of people get sick, in, like, say they all go to a college, and then, everybody in this class, one by one, they start experiencing flu-like symptoms, right? And so then there's the accepted, well, the flu's going around, it's just a virus, it's a viral infection. And um, but I wonder, because I know the germ theory was, I guess there was a lot about bacteria for that one, but viruses might be grouped in there as well. It's just an infectious agent. Um, And I actually started questioning this too, like wondering, well, what is a virus? What do I know about this? Because it really intrigued me that we considered it to be a dead thing unless it was in a person, and that it had sections of RNA or DNA, and also that it was apparently the most abundant microorganism on the planet. So there's all these like different pieces where I was trying to sort out, well, what exactly is it? And do people really get infectious? Or maybe are they just exposed to something in the same environment and then they're expressing similar detox symptoms?
Mhm.
What did you find?
Yeah, mostly the way that we've been trained to look at something needs to be shifted. A lot of what we think is happening is a simpleton way of thinking, which is based on superstition and not based on fact, and looking deeper at what other possibilities could be explanations for why a group of people might come down with a similar set of symptoms. Like in a school, for example, like you said, I mean, a lot of the time they've eaten the same food at the cafeteria and they've been given food poisoning, and food poisoning symptoms can look like flu.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody gets it. So why wouldn't everybody get it? Why will only some people get it? You have to ask that question. And then you have to think about what else could be happening in a situation where you see a pattern. And a lot of people can't seem to see patterns. I think that's a part of our blinders as humans. Maybe it's been trained out of us or dumbed down out of us or something, but missing understanding cycles of things and patterns of things, that every so often we are triggered by external causes, which could be as simple as a weather change for certain people who don't regularly eat well, who don't regularly detoxify their body actively, to be triggered into expression of wastes, which have a set of symptoms that go along with it. Another problem I found is a lot of people have been taught to associate a symptom with something bad
Mm-hmm.
because it's uncomfortable. So if you have a runny nose or you have itchy eyes or you have a scratchy throat, then it's okay, it's bad, right? But they don't understand that it's a bodily mechanism that's actually being activated in order to purge something from the body or to correct the body. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a so-called problem, the only problem being that you obviously didn't have enough nutrition to process the toxins appropriately through the means of the liver. You were unable to mount that properly, so the body had to go through a secondary route of removing it, which is using some of the other routes of elimination, which are the lungs and the skin, the mucus, right? The urine, whatever it has to get out, because the body is going to preserve life at all costs. And so instead of realizing that the symptom is actually there for a reason, people instead say it's bad and I have to suppress it. I have to make it go away. And then if I make the symptom go away, then I'm well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we see the increases in chronic disease, because we don't allow acute diseases anymore. We don't permit the seasonal expression to come out of people that have been poisoned by air and food and water and stress and all of these other lifestyle factors. And if they were really wise, they would do what people like myself do, or anybody, or I'm sure yourself as well, Amy, being in the health field. You take care of your body, you take care of your terrain, you pay attention to the subtle symptoms before they become overt. So if you're feeling on a little bit low energy, you question that. You go, well, maybe I'm missing something in my diet right now. Have I been eating well, or have I been doing something that hurts me? Like, have I been, not drinking enough water, or have I been wearing a mask all day, which does self-harm? Or have I been, drinking lots of coffee or alcohol, or restricting something healthy inside of me? Or have I been poisoning myself actively with drugs? And the body has to do a workaround. So if you want to understand how the body works, then it's pretty simple. The toxins have to come out one way or another. The nutrition has to be present, because that's the biochemistry that runs all of your systems. And you have to consider the other layers of the human, which are the mental layers and the emotional aspects. And those all can lead to sickness and certain types of expression. So if somebody has a fever, this is one of the ones that bothers me a lot, especially in the culture. right? You see it in a lot of movies and television shows, which are there to subtly brainwash people into thinking that a fever is bad. Like, how many shows have I watched where, like, oh, they have a fever, get that fever down right away, no matter what. In the hero at the end, what did they do? They put ice on them and they got the fever down, and then they were healed magically. And it's a lie. It's not how the body works at all. It's Hollywood magic. You want the fever. The fever is what does the job. The fever is what heals the body. Even super high fevers are working well for the body. You just want to stay hydrated and fast and make sure that the body can recover through the healing crisis, which people also have no idea about. They have no understanding of a healing crisis and what that is, and that you only get to that place if you've really done a disservice to your body for a really long time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Then there's no way around it. You're going to have a healing crisis. It's going to be uncomfortable and you're not going to like it.
Mhm.
And if you continue to suppress the healing crisis, then you will die. The organism will fail. And to me, I think it's all very simple, and truth does get into simplicity, and where you can speak it in a sentence, ultimately.
Mhm.
So that's part of that goes into part of the philosophy. But the germ theory aspect is there's other ways to explain why a group of people would get sick at the same time. Also, resonance or vibrational triggers. We're energy beings. We're tribal as well. There's people who are similar in their DNA compared to others. There's similar environmental factors that overlap, and we have hormone signaling as well. We should know we have pheromones and that they cause effects on people, like women to men in pheromones, or women to women when they start to have their menstrual cycles together. They're not catching their menstrual cycle from one another. There's another signal happening there when they're in close contact. And the nurse Florence Nightingale, she understood contagion was not true because she had a bunch of soldiers in a hospital room with closed windows that progressed from one disease type to another in the same space. And all that. And then what she realized is that the fever was changing and the disease was worsening because there was no airflow. And these toxic soldiers, which had been vaccinated, were just recycling through the air all of their own poisons. They just kept reabsorbing the gases from each other. When she opened the window, they all healed.
Yeah.
So
That's
it
interesting because
mhm.
one of the things I remember coming across in your research was exosomes, and I was thinking about people getting what we call the flu in a school setting, and thinking about, well, if your body, if the cells are detoxing and you have developed these exosomes and then they're released into the environment, then could somebody take them up and, like, like they're gassing in a room that has poor ventilation, and that leads to exposure to something toxic, and it's not necessarily what we consider a virus, but it becomes an environmental toxin.
Well, there's different particles. There's not just exosomes.
Hmm.
It's a fun catchphrase, I think, for a lot of people to use to try to explain it, and that's
Okay.
okay.
Hmm.
But there's actually a lot more particles involved, and like the somatids or the proteins or the microzyma, as they've been named by individual researchers, are really a lot of the repair tools. So there's nucleic acid particles surrounded by these proteins, and they go to an area that's damaged to see how much cellular debris can be repaired before it's actually removed. And those also become waste particles eventually that can look like so-called viruses. They also have, little blebs around them. The little smaller versions of the proteins just look like tiny little balls with DNA or RNA in them, so that you could confuse them for that. Exosomes also aren't just waste material. They're tools inside the body to communicate from one cell structure to another. So they might actually send nutrients across, not just wastes. And then you have the phages, and phages are like basically shock proteins from bacteria that want to preserve their own DNA or RNA. And that's when the conditions have become suddenly detrimental to the bacterium, and they will create the phage. But if it's a slow environmental suppression, it will go into basically a sporoform, uh, which takes a bit more time to manufacture by the bacterium. So the lineage wants to preserve itself because it's essential to life. So I hope people understand when you realize that the bacterium is essential to our life, to life on this earth, and that it will preserve itself at all costs. So if it's a slow kill, it will go one way, and if it's a fast kill, it will go another way to preserve itself because it's vital to life. So spraying everything down with, antimicrobials and using antibiotics and using vaccines destroys life. That's all it does, and it alters our life. And it's a travesty. I wake up every day, and it's hard to manage sometimes to the ignorance and the illusion and the damage that people are doing to themselves and to their children, which is even worse to witness. So it's there's different. I mean, I'm considering about, authoring books and so forth, maybe on it, or collaborating with others. But what's exciting about, I think, now is that we're actually having the conversation, because when I was talking about it 3 or 4 years ago, there weren't too many of us having this conversation. And it was an interesting thing to talk about. And it led down, obviously, one of my goals was to make sure people realize the damaging effects of vaccines, and to not ever put that in their bodies. That is never a necessity, never has been, never saved a life, never has done anything good for us at all. In fact, the opposite. And that we've been sold a lie about that. We've been sold lies about every single one of them, and how our history was. So how can we even verify it without deep enough research? Because if you go to their science and their history, it's a circular argument. They'll just take you right back to everything safe and effective and wonderful, and in their little la la land, right? Meanwhile, I have autistic children walking into my practice that their parents witness them get a vaccine, and they lose their child right before their eyes, which is just the most horrifying thing you could ever witness.
Yeah.
So, and they've been gaslighted and ignored for since the beginning. So, anyway, I guess what my point is that there's a lot to learn, and also there's other ways to know about how the body works. There's other understanding that if you just take a step back and have a thought exercise about, hey, how could a group of students possibly get sick at the same time with same symptoms, then you'll realize that there's many other explanations that are very logical and very plausible.
And I guess I'd like to address some of those historical infectious diseases that pop up in people's minds when they think about, well, vaccines worked for this and vaccines worked for this, or this did exist because I knew somebody who had this. And for example, with the AIDS virus, I saw TC Fry's interview about that, and I feel like it's when you when we say with absolute certainty that it's a this virus and this is what's causing it, it sort of is like this magic trick that stops people from looking at anything else. What
Mhm.
could be the other factors and the factors that I myself can try to address without, you know, becoming dependent on a pharmaceutical product. So I wonder if you could talk about those some of the big historical infectious diseases and what you discovered around them.
Well, I mean, HIV virus leading to AIDS was such a scandal. And it's a terrible travesty what happened to the people who were victims of EZT and the testing. And it's interesting because it's a recycling of, it's actually a combo. What we're seeing today is a combination of the scam and the tactics used in the fake flu pandemic, Spanish flu pandemic, and also of the HIV hoax. So it's like a combo. And actually, Fauci was involved in the HIV hoax as well. So that's why they brought him in for this, because he knows how the PCR can be manipulated to make all kinds of people look like they have diseases that they don't have. And that's what they did with the HIV test as well. It basically tested particles of wastes in people who were partiers, who did poppers, who had all these PCPs in them, and were having a lifestyle that was causing their immune systems to, well, I say immune systems, even though I don't really stand by that term at all. We don't really have an immune system either. I could go into that. Basically, our entire body is an immune system. every system in you has its own immune system. So it's because self must be preserved at all costs. Self versus non-self is what the immune system is responsible for. If it's not you, it's got to get out. If it's a food that you ate and you had leaky gut because you were given a vaccine that damaged your gut and then it gets into your bloodstream, that's not self. It's got to come out one way or another. So the body is responsible for that. That's what the immune system is responsible for, and shuttling them out through white blood cell engulfment, so forth. So it's that time frame really. So if you go back to the Spanish flu time frame, what was happening is you had soldiers who had been experimented on with vaccines, and they came back from a war, and they were very sick, and they were all over the world, these people, but they were then isolated. And because of ignorance in the medical community, which is, again, they're trained to believe only in the chemical medicine, they're not trained about how the body works. They're specialists, so they compartmentalize things. So they don't understand holism, they don't understand energy. And so all they know is that somebody's sick or a bunch of people together are sick. They automatically assume that it's an infectious disease when multiple people are sick. And that's what happened there. And so then they caused hype and fear with propaganda, like we see today, among the population who are gullible and ignorant and brainwash themselves by putting themselves in front of the propaganda and eating it, really. And then they started to mask themselves. And they also started to use large amounts of aspirin at the time. And aspirin can cause a specific disease of the lungs, which basically liquefies the lungs. The lungs become heavy with liquid. And so they were having true respiratory diseases at that time from aspirin use and masking at the same time, even though they didn't mask hardly as much as what's going on today. They only had 2 phases of mask wearing. And most people were against it and fighting against it. And there were people that report at that time frame going around and helping, going from household to household, and who were not ill, who were helping those who were ill, and none of them ever became sick from it. You would think that by exposure to droplets, as they love to scare you with droplets from someone else's body, that you will become infected, right? And so they did this, and the stress and fear alone can cause a lung disease. If you understand German New Medicine, the shock factor and the undigestible morsel that's created when you're told something so horrific, that all these people are dying and there's some scary thing floating around and your kids could die just by walking outside, and stay away from people, and one droplet could be the end of you, and this sort of thing. It's a fear that's very stressful and can lead, ironically, to the disease in which they are trying to say is caused by some sort of boogeyman, thing floating through the air. And the deaths really came more so from when the vaccine was deployed, just like what's going to happen here. So we haven't seen any deaths because there's no virus. This is all a game. But when the vaccine does come out, then the deaths will come. That's when it comes. And that's what happened in the Spanish flu. You had your initial so-called disease, which is a very fortunate, let's say, event for the evil ones, the handlers, the ones who are playing the game, right? They're the ones who can then say, oh, look, it's bad. There's something bad happening. Now, what we must do is we're going to use this to scare the Jesus out of everyone and push our drugs on them and our remedies and force them to do things and all of this sort of game. So that's really that. Now, the HIV hoax is very devious, it's very hateful. It's targeting the gay population, specifically gay white men. and it murdered hundreds of thousands of gay men. And also was targeted with African Americans, and in Africa it was very targeted as well. So they ran the scam there too. All you need are nutritionally deficient people who are either starving or really worn down from their lifestyle, and you can have a positive PCR test.
Mm.
So, and then you can say, oh dear, you have it, you know. So now you need this drug, and they made so much money off of that. What a scam! Gavi and all these scam artists, they made them billions of dollars on their fake relief efforts and sob stories and pulling money out of good citizens through fake charities. And
Mm.
I mean, and then using those industries to money launder and to have political sway. And they're scum. They're absolute scum, these people. So once you dig back and you understand, like Brian Ellison's work, that sort of, and you read some of that history, it's really mind opening, and really takes a bit of strength to because you realize how terrible these people are. And your world has to change at that point when you realize that all of these people who are in these agencies and the governments, they're all bought,
Mhm.
they're all puppets. They've That's why they're able to move forward now with their world, their global initiatives, because they finally have all of their puppets in place to do it. That's
Yeah.
basically why we're seeing it en masse like this now, instead of just an isolated area.
Mm. With the masks, I wonder, is with people getting ill from that, if you could talk a bit about that, and does pleomorphism come into play there?
Well, what's wild is here you have healthy people, no disease symptoms, which is quite brilliant. They've done this time. They've convinced the masses that you can be sick without any symptoms. That's a pretty that's like a Vulcan mind trick or something there. That's like a whole other level of brainwashing that just it really blows my mind that people can believe that they actually believe that you can be sick without being sick. But anyway, they have them forcing themselves to actually hurt themselves. So that's what's incredible about it, which again can lead to respiratory illnesses and testing positive for with the fake test, right? Because of course they're poisoning themselves. They're reducing their oxygen. They're not allowing waste to come out of the body, which is the respiratory system is very delicate. It has to remove carbon dioxide, has to remove excess nitrogen, has to remove things properly to keep the blood in homeostasis, right? And if not, it has to adapt. And how it adapts is it has to increase red blood cell production.
Mm.
So now you have all these people upregulating their RBCs, their hemoglobin levels are going up, right? Their hematocrits, if you test all these people's blood, you will find that their numbers will be on the high side because their body has to adapt. It's like being dropped off at high altitude all of a sudden, right? And your blood will have to make more of itself because now you're going to need more oxygen delivery because you've reduced it. So your body's going to try to adapt by making more red blood cells, which carry the oxygen. So this is what people have the beginning phases of doing the mask wearing. That's what's an adaptation that will happen. Actually, runners or mountain climbers, mountain climbers who do this for a living, they actually on purpose will wear a mask
Mhm.
when they go for a run or something, just for a small amount of time, to try to actually make more red blood cells so that they can cope when they're going like up Mount Everest, that sort of thing, right? But that's a very specific niche, and there's very strict rules on how you do that without hurting yourself, right? So then you have to consider it's this whole area. They're breathing in all of these waste products, also back into their sinuses. Also with the mouth, it's changing the acidity of the mouth. So we're getting a lot of mask mouth, which is going to cause cavities, all kinds of odor issues and other bacteria that normally would just be washed out by the mouth and by the pH being appropriate. It wouldn't fester there, but now we're having that problem. I actually had a woman in my store the other day, and I don't allow people in my store wearing masks, and I haven't complied with any of these draconian, ridiculous things that go against our human rights and our break all of our codes and basic human just birthright to breathe air.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, she came in, she's looking for a cream because I make, natural creams and salves and these sorts of things. And she had a terrible rash. And I said, do you understand that you're a healthy woman? You have no health symptoms. You hadn't had any symptoms whatsoever. And now you've been wearing a mask all this time. And now you have symptoms, though. Now you're sick. Now you're unwell from wearing it. I said, why are you doing something that causes you harm? In, in the idea is to prevent harm, is it not? Isn't that why everybody's doing this?
Mhm.
Is to somehow prevent harm, right? And but yet here you are harmed.
Mhm.
And it clicked for her. It just she realized, yeah, you're right. I'm hurting myself and I'm suffering for it. And I was fine before. And I was like, yes. Yeah. So I said, if you know the law, you realize you don't have to comply with any of it, any of it. They're
Right.
all illegal. Every last bit of what's going on is completely illegal.
Mhm.
If you challenge it in court, you will win your
Yeah.
case. Just take the fine and challenge it. I took my fine. I'm challenging it.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, but we have actual charter rights, rights and freedoms that that trump any of these so-called recommendations.
Yeah.
But people believe it like it's law. It's not law. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
It's completely illegal what they're doing, and they will suffer for it. And we are suing, and many are being sued. And we're just going to keep using the legal process as much as we can, and as fast as we can to stop these really disgusting evil people from destroying what we had. We had freedom, and now we've given it up
Mhm.
based on an illusion. And then so sometimes it takes that awakening, right? Like for her it was just that moment where she realized she was hurting herself.
Mhm.
And I said, also in the masks, there's these fine cloth particles, and you're inhaling those, and those can cause issues in the lungs. And as well, every study that I read, all the mask studies. I always will do that on any sort of topic. There is no evidence, and there never was evidence. You can't prove evidence of ever preventing anything ever. And but there's lots of evidence of harm,
Yeah.
lots of it. And even ONA, which is the Ontario Nurses Association, they fought twice in court and won against nurses to protect nurses who were being forced to wear masks all through their shift for refusing to take a flu shot that causes Guillain-Barre disease and all these other syndromes and diseases. And they have every right to say no to something that has a 3 to 7% possible efficacy in their ghost written science. Their own science only says that, right?
Yeah.
And and they're wearing masks and suffering for it. And
Mhm.
they won because all of the mask experts said this is not how masks are worn. Even back in the 2003 SARS hoax, even the government sued a company that was claiming that you could wear masks to prevent SARS. Um, and they said you can't. And actually, after 20 minutes of wear, they're useless. And as soon as you touch it with your dirty hand, they're contaminated. And there's rules around mask wearing. I see people walking around adjusting it every 2 seconds. It's garbage at that point.
Yeah.
I see them wearing it down here. What is this? What is the chin warmer thing about? Like, this isn't, none of it is being
Yeah.
done properly. You can't wear it like a bandana over your face or reuse a mask day to day. It's absurdity. It's absolute absurdity. It's mind boggling to me. I feel like we literally stepped into a Twilight Zone episode. That's
Yeah.
the only way I can describe it. And I've had to do a lot of inner work just to get through this in
Mhm.
one piece with my sanity, because
Yeah.
it's alarming how many people have actually swallowed the propaganda.
Mm. Fear, I find, is a really good tactic to get people not to think. And one of the things that's interesting, talking about the masks and self harm, and even accepting a medical um, recommendation, such as a vaccine, and not even looking into it, but they're selling the idea that um, it's it is almost like um, is something cultural that we've had for a while, but it's sacrificing yourself for the good of others. And I wonder if you could take that concept and talk a bit about how the body actually functions in ways that we're not taught, and how harming yourself actually does not benefit others and can actually make things worse in the long run.
Hmm. Well, I mean, the school system has been usurped for a long time, and been teaching false information for a long time. Myself, I had to do a lot of unlearning from my scholastic training. I mean, I was in school my whole life. I did extra high school because I changed my major from arts to science. Then I went right into university without an interlude, and I had to take a little bit of extra of that too because I was going to go to vet school and I needed a little more extra credits there. And there was a lot of brainwashing that goes through the schools, especially in they universities are and colleges are ripe with socialism. They really push the socialism in school, and those institutions really in a frightening way, which I didn't realize until I sort of came out and I was like, oh, okay, climate change is a hoax, and all of these things are just lies. And I got manipulated into all this activism that made me feel like I was somehow helping others and saving the world and saving humanity. And it feeds on your ego. It makes you think you have to be altruistic, makes you, it feeds on these ideas of grandeur that you're somehow, because you feel so insignificant because they've made you feel insignificant.
Hmm.
So somehow if you you'll feel better if you do things for others, so that's
Right.
the right thing to do. And then there's all the religiosity in there as well, which is another whole layer of brainwashing, do things in this way and that way. And it's, what's unfortunate is how evil works. It manipulates good intentions, it manipulates people who have good hearts and mean well and really do care and do. I want a good, I want the environment to be healthy, I want animals to thrive, I want our life to thrive. Why wouldn't I? It's a perfectly normal, natural thing to feel. But then when you have agendas behind that that are trying to say that they're that, but the underlying is not, while it's steering you off the edge of a cliff,
Hmm.
that's evil. That's what evil is. And that's what Greenpeace, all these, whatever, all of these groups that I was involved in, I realized that they play on your ego and they steal your energy and they make you virtue signal only. It's really what all this mask wearing is, all virtue signaling. Like,
Hmm.
I that's what I mean, how evil it is, where people, they mean well, they're good people, they're not evil people,
Hmm.
but here they are wearing a mask, and but they think they're being good, and they think they're being just, and they think they're being righteous, and they're not. In fact, they're being
Yep.
used to the exact opposite. And then they become evil, and that's very hard to face. There's a lot of guilt that will come through a lot of people, just like I hear a lot of mothers and fathers who are so ridden with guilt because they harmed their children, believing the doctors and listening to them, and they regret deeply ever listening to them, and they wish they could go back in time and change that decision, and they have to live with that guilt for the rest of their lives, and there's no ownership of that by the profession. They just go along and cut people, and while they bleed, and they don't they turn away and go and cut the next person. There's just no responsibility for it at all. So it's, through all of my scholastic training, I just realized that all of this information I was being told just wasn't quite right, and I had to unlearn so much. And I think that's really hard for people, especially imagine you go into a profession that is part of that. Like, you really dive in, right? And you become a
Yeah.
doctor, or you become part of the system, politician, or some of these things, right? And you realize that it's the opposite, and you're stuck. You're
Hmm.
trapped, and now your livelihood and your existence of who you are depends on you believing the lies. And that's, in order to transform, that's a radical 180, and a lot of people do not have the uh, what is it, the gall, I guess, to do it. or
Mm-hmm.
the integrity
Mm-hmm.
to do it, and they would rather hide from that information. Sorry, I lost where we were my
Yeah, no,
original
that's
question, because I
um,
always go off on these
yeah.
tangents. And
Well, actually, before we go to what I asked, it was about the human body functioning and what we're
oh
not
yes,
really
yes, yes.
taught about that.
Hmm.
Um, but just to touch on what you were saying, I think a lot of the fear comes from the fact that people have actually, the biggest brainwashing is that they don't realize who they are, like who they really are. And if they did, then you can forgive yourself for ignorance in the past. And you can
Yeah.
take all of that and say, well, now I know this. What am I going to do with it? And now, because I experienced that being ignorant and discovering that, I can understand other people who still don't know what's going on. And I remember what that was like, and I can figure out how to reach them. But when people are attached to that and are afraid to let go, it's because they don't realize that that doesn't define them. They're beyond that, and
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one where people just think this is me and without it I'm nothing, and there's all these identity tags and such. But
Hmm.
so let's go, before I tell people about your websites and where they can find you. um, I want to talk a bit about, because you did talk about this throughout the interview, about energy and about resonance, and there are communication signals like with pheromones and things that we don't actually see, but that this is how the body is functioning. And you mentioned how you don't really use immune system. So I wonder if we could address, how does the body um, heal itself in ways that were not traditionally taught.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's goes back full circle, really, into the naturopathic training or the holistic thinking, right? And also using intuition and energy and feeling out something, because you if you detach your ego, so if you do the ego work where you detach yourself from that I am the ego, and you which takes introspection and quiet. So it means you turn off the television and you meditate. It means you read, it means you write a diary, or a journal, where you actually have to do introspective work. It's the only, excuse me, it's the only way that you can unhinge or unpin the ego from your identity and see you as two separate things. And that I call that, and not just me, but a lot of people who have done this work, it's called developing the second attention, where you're a witness to yourself. So you know that the ego is part of your fundamental personality, and that's fine. It gives you uniqueness. And so you don't squash it or obliterate it, but what you do is you hone it and you chisel it and you watch it, and you take note of it, and not in a judgmental way, but just in a neutral, pure witness and or a listener. And then you make adjustments as you go. And so if you realize that you've attached yourself to an ideology or to a job or to any of these things, then the second attention, once it's developed, you say, I see myself doing that, but that's not who I really am. That's just something I do, or that's something I like, or something I gravitate towards, or something I have a lesson to learn through, or, right? And then you start to navigate your world that way, and it becomes more free, actually, because you're not pinned to any of those belief systems. You're not stuck in any of that. So you do feel freer. But there's different types of people. So there's different types of, there's something called the human design system. I study a lot of astrology and a lot of these different systems. And some people's centers of their body are very defined, and some people are undefined. And so for me, I have an undefined mind. So it's easier for me to pick up new ideas or to run with it all the way to the end and see if I like it or not, right? I'm very imaginative. I'm very creative in my mind and my thinking. I use a lot of dream work, but that's not for everyone. Not everyone thinks like that. Not everyone's created like that. So they're going to have to do it a little bit different, depending on how what their signature is, or what their um, uh, their root is like, and how their motors work inside of them. So it's going to be a little bit different. And that even is ego. It took me realizing it's my ego, realizing that everybody is going to do it the way that I did it. It's not, and I have to respect that. And everyone has, a little bit of a different path going on. So it helps me have more compassion as well, to how difficult this can be for certain types of people. But then the holistic understanding through school, even though I had to unlearn even through naturopathic college, because a lot of them still believe in immune system and germ theory and all this stuff,
Mm.
and vaccines are good, and it's just not whole. It's not nature doctors. It's not holistic medicine at all. The holistic principles are basically that there's a this is a oneness experience, right? And not just, oh sorry, not oneness in our bodies, but oneness in sorry, I'm just going to close something down here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I if I touch my earbud, it turns on something in the
Oh, I
background.
see.
I think I turned it off now. I'm like, I'm hearing Janice Barcelo now in my head. I'm like, oh
Oh,
my god.
okay.
So I just had to turn that off. Okay, woo. So anyway, so it helps to understand that when you have a holism, that there's not one separation. So if you have a thought, then your thought is turning into a chemical that's coming into your body, right?
Yeah.
And if you can realize that there's organs that have different roles, and they have to communicate with one another with hormone systems and electrical systems, and that our brain is electricity and our nervous system is electricity, and they go, whoa, wait a second, we have electricity in our bodies. We're not just, this stuff, this tissue. It's way more immediate. Like, you can think a thought like, I'm going to move my finger, and it's moving right now,
Mhm.
but you actually have to think that thought to move your finger. Look how immediate that is. Look how fast that is, right? We can't even conceive of that. So I think the way we've been taught about the human body has been by design, so that we're pretty ignorant
Mhm.
about its function, that we don't understand that we need to balance it through certain behaviors, and that we are meant to go through a lot of schooling and a lot of like, this is earth school, this is a training ground for our souls, and that we're bigger than this, there's more to us than this, we're not just some little random floating thing in outer space, that we're very important,
Mhm.
and that we're very unique, and that we each bring something to our purpose, and that we have always unlimited potential. And if we just need to live it, we need to realize it and do the work, and then you have peace and you have happiness, and you have when you live your purpose like that. And it takes bravery to live your purpose. And how many people, even though this is what's going on, is evil and wrong, when you look at it like that, but look at the other hand, look at how many people are waking up to the lie of the germ theory right now. Look at the conversations we're having that we never had before.
Mhm.
Look at the amount of people that are starting to really see through the illusions and are coming away from it. Look at how many people are building new alliances and starting to get off grid and realizing that it's time to grow your own food. It's time to step away from materialism, and find out what really matters about life, and take care of each other, and that we don't need these institutions and governments and these sorts of things, that they're all tyrannical, and that we're tired of it. We're tired of the fake and the lie and the diseases and the suffering. We want something more. And I think it's edging those of us who are already there over to the breakaway society, and those people who are suffering through this, impo- basically forced poverty, because with the second lockdown that just happened in Toronto, and it's happening in other places with absolutely no evidence of disease, they're trying to bankrupt people as much as they can, so that they go into debt relief programs and rely on the system, on their handlers, on
Yeah.
the socialist handlers. So,
Mhm.
it's a choice. There's a choice here for people to either become an adult spiritually, or to they still need their mommy and daddy to take care of them, kind of idea. And I see that going on currently.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, before we finish off, I'd like to ask you about your emporium and what you offer, what services you offer to people, and where people can find you, your website, social media, that sort of thing, because I'm sure they'll be interested to follow and to look at some of your videos and do some of their own research.
Yes. Well, I began this journey, becoming a mother, and I was a single mother, and I was pretty much homeless and broke. And I remember I was just praying one night, and I was saying, to the Creator, just show me my purpose. What's the next step on my path? Because when I went to naturopathic college, I was very vocal and I was very political, and I got blacklisted very early on. And I realized that that industry was also corrupted. So I didn't go forward with the licensure. And even though I'm fully trained, so I've been very isolated, and having a newborn, and doing everything without obviously taking her into the medical cult. I did everything at home, and she's a fully natural birth. She's never been touched by the hands of modern medicine. So of course she's perfectly brilliant and healthy and incredible child. But at the time I needed a solution. And so I began with what I just listened to what the other mothers wanted, and they wanted solutions for their baby's teething. They wanted solutions for their baby's eczema, when I told them that it was caused by the vaccines, of course, but then I helped them, heal it and so forth. And I just started to design remedies. I didn't know that I was good at creating, skincare. It was just something that I needed as a necessity for others and also for my own child. I needed a sunscreen that wasn't full of toxins. I needed diaper rash cream that wasn't full of toxins. I needed bug spray. I needed all these things when I moved up north. And so I basically, the type of person says, well, if I can't find it, I'll make it.
Mm.
And that's what I began to do. And I had a love and a passion that came through that. So I just kept going. And so that website, that where I have all of the things that I make, plus professional supplements, as a holistic practitioner, is YumNaturals.com.
Mhm.
And it used to be Yummy Mummy Emporium and Apothecary, but it's quite a mouthful. And and also I couldn't use the Yummy Mummy as a branding because it's been trademarked already. So
Okay, let me
I
screen share here so people can see it. Now, can you see this? Okay, so
yes,
this is Yummy Doctor, and we've also
yes,
got, here we go. This is your Yum Naturals
that's the one.
Emporium. Yeah.
Right. So that's the one where the shop is, and it's it's the newer website. So I'm
Mm.
still refining some of the images and putting. I have so many products. I have like 600 products, so I think I only have about 400 on the site right now.
All right.
So I make that DMSO with natural magnesium. I make a
Wow.
lot of DMSO products which don't exist anywhere else,
Okay.
because no one really has. I love making soap, so those are all my soaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun. And then some professional supplements and some things that are, just smart things to use. Yeah, there's some creams, eye drops, DMSO eye drops. Facelift Najar is famous. It is famous. I'm going to get that Health Canada approved, even though I don't like them, but I'll do it because people need it. They're like,
And
my face has changed.
here's the
And
interesting thing. I actually haven't looked too much into DMSO, but this is something you really seem to specialize in.
yeah, it happened by accident, just like most of them, or maybe it was a happy, setup. But DMSO became a real passion of mine, and was actually the only video that went viral on my YouTube channel, which has now been deleted by YouTube
Mm,
through the
yeah.
censorship that a lot of us have been dealing with. But I've got a new one under my name, Amanda with an H,
Hmm.
Amandha, and Vollmer. So if you go look Amanda Vollmer on YouTube, you'll find my new channel.
Okay.
But then I was asked to write the book after I did that video, because I just read all the science. And then I read every DMSO book, even the ones translated from German, and before I wrote this. And it was about twice as big as the book is got made there. So I'll have more to come out when I
Oh,
get some time to
yeah.
write the second edition. Yeah. But
Cool.
it's very helpful because it's very functional for people. They know the safety, the handling, how to use it for certain conditions, and then how to actually use it for with recipes and make their own eye drops and their own things at home. And that's what I
Okay.
really wanted people to do.
And this
Yeah.
website, this is for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Yummy.doctor site. So we just decided, my business partner and I decided that I would just separate out the different facets.
Hmm.
So Yummy.doctor is for my practice.
Hmm.
It has my services, it has my blog, and it will also have my own video server on this particular site. So all my
Okay.
videos will be here and able to be searched here. We're just working on that right now. Because of all the censorship, we just decided it would be a worthy investment to just put it out ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's lots of
yeah, I
great
have a lot of articles.
information here in your blog articles that I've looked at. I think people would find them really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're not even all up here because we been transferring from the old website to the new website,
Hmm.
which is still a work in progress. But, you know, doctor means teacher, and the teaching is what I'm very passionate about, as much as the creation, the making, being an artist at heart. Um, so it just all gets rolled in and into how can I live my purpose and serve humanity, and help people, you know, awaken to themselves so that they can have their own peace and happiness and internal freedom. And I think that's the most pure thought we could have, is to wish that for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's been so challenging to see so many suffering under this illusion. And I'm hoping that the illusion just gets so crisp for people that they're able to like peel it off and peel it back, and then see through, and shake off their slumber, and awaken, because I think this is a special time
Hmm.
for those to, for us to awaken,
Yeah.
and and come together finally, as a people, that we don't need anybody else but ourselves, and that we're enough, and that we'll be in a place of vibrational care and love and support. And I see it coming. I see glimpses of it, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
So but there you can find me. And I'm on all kinds of social media now. I'm on Facebook, but you know what's going on there. So
Hmm.
um, where I've moved on to minds.com and MeWe, and I'm on Patreon, and I have a bunch. I think it scattered a lot of us into all
Hmm.
these different places.
Yeah.
So we're still finding our footing about what's going to work. But so far, I really like Telegram. I think
Hmm.
Telegram has been one of the best places to collaborate. I feel the connection with people better,
Hmm.
and we can still share all the posts and all the information properly and have conversations as we want. So it's not censored at all. So I feel that so far is a really great place to be. So you can find me there as well.
Oh, well, I would just want to thank you for coming on here. I have to say, I'm definitely with you in seeing that there's this really amazing light at the end, and when people first come across this information about, maybe they were lied to with the viruses and the vaccines, and it can be, you can see it in a negative light, but I actually found it really exciting because I've always wanted to be free and to not be dependent on um, anything if I didn't have to. So, any
Mhm.
medical thing. And I believed that I would be able to figure out how to live well with nature, and I just needed to discover it. So, coming across your research was like, wow, this is so cool, because it means that we don't need vaccines. It's just another thing where you can say, hey, the human body is so amazing, look at what it can do. And nature is so amazing, look at what it can do. So, yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great note to end it on, because I think despite all of the negative and heavy stuff going on, there is some real positives that are coming out of it. So thank you so much for giving us your time, and I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate the time with you, and us having a really conscious discussion, and leaving it on a positive note for people, that there is hope, and that we are getting somewhere through this. It's not for nothing, and that soon we'll be tired of, the suffering, and we'll come into self-love and self-care, and then we'll get through it, and into a collaborative wonderful place that we really, really wanted in the long run. We desired it deep down. So we'll have it. Thank you.